Welcome back to Farm Theory News. Today we are doing an energy special. I'm doing a ChatGPT intro again, bear with me. Farm Theory News is your one-stop shop for the agri-news that matters. We deliver the hard-hitting stories with just enough humour to stop you from crying into your porridge. Speaking of porridge, the UK government has officially declared it as an unhealthy food. Apparently, adding that splash of milk or adding that extra bit of honey is what makes it a health hazard. Oh, you couldn't make this stuff up. You actually couldn't make this stuff up. Meanwhile, sugary cereals with more additives than... ChatGPT changed my script. What a bunch of scumbags. They took out my Bouvier reference. That's so weird. Why would they have done that? I'm going back to my original. Meanwhile, sugary cereals loaded with more additives than Arla milk escape scrutiny because they are fortified. I can't believe ChatGPT took that out. We haven't even finished the intro and we're deep into the madness of this current world. Roll the intro.
Farm Theory News, we're bringing the facts. No paywalls here, no forced BBC tax. Honest and clear, no spin, no disguise. This is where legacy media dies. Farm Theory News, where the truth rolls tall. Out in the fields, we're breaking it all. No filters, no fees, no mainstream spin. This is Farm News Uncut, where truth wins.
Today we're doing... Oh, I'm nearly out of battery as well. I thought I charged that. I didn't turn on the plug. No. It's been one of them days. Anyway, today we're doing something different with Farm Theory News. We're really going to focus in on a topic, and that topic is energy. Why are we focusing on energy? Because cheap, reliable energy is the backbone of a thriving economy. It's really not a coincidence that European manufacturing is in crisis, food prices have soared, and growth has stagnated ever since the energy crisis in 2022. And the clearest example of this is the contrast between Europe and the USA. The innovation and growth America has experienced over the last 3 or 4 years is a really clear example of why cheap energy is essential for a thriving economy. So today we're going to look at what's went wrong in Europe and what could potentially fix the problem. Let's start with some hard truths. UK electricity prices are amongst the highest in the world. UK industry pays 4 times more than our US counterparts and 50% more than the global average. Why? Well, there are 3 main reasons. Number 1, the UK is dependent on imported energy. This leaves us vulnerable to the volatile global energy markets. Do we have to be dependent on imported energy? No, we don't. It has been a government decision over successive years to cut back on our own production and import energy instead. Second reason, and the biggest reason why our energy is currently so expensive, is because of the renewable transition cost. Turns out there is no such thing as cheap green energy. It is in fact expensive, unreliable, kinda green energy. And the final cost facing the UK energy market is grid infrastructure upgrades. Why are most of them upgrades necessary? To facilitate renewable energy. So that final point is definitely heavily associated with the renewable energy transition. So let's try and put some figures on how much them 3 points are adding to our energy costs. Right, 6th time trying to get this line out. According to the UK Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, the cost of generating electricity from natural gas is around 8.5 pence per kilowatt hour. Yet in 2023, the average price of industrial energy here in the UK was 25.5 pence per kilowatt hour. That means that over 2/3 of the energy costs that you and I pay is not for the actual energy. It is a stealth tax to fund the so-called energy transition, which is just mental. UK industry and consumers are footing a huge bill for the shift away from cheap, reliable energy towards expensive, unreliable energy. That just makes no sense. And this isn't just an energy issue or how much you see on your electric bill. The price of energy affects everything. It is a real threat to our economic competitiveness, and it also affects every single person's living standards, which is why it is such an important topic to be discussed and understood. Let me give you a few examples from recent news of how insane the UK's energy policy actually is. Storm Dara swept through the UK last week and caused extensive damage to solar farms across the UK. Not only did it damage solar farms, but all of the wind turbines, which are meant to be providing the bulk of the UK's energy, had to shut down because the wind was too strong. Winter is when energy infrastructure is most critical. Yet our reliance on wind and solar during winter leaves us extremely vulnerable. At the time of writing, just 7% of Northern Ireland's energy mix is coming from renewables. That is far below the 44%, which is our annual average. And that annual average itself actually fell last year, down from 47% in the year previous. So whilst renewable energy might seem like a really good idea, and it is a big win for climate, it's a big loss for the UK's citizens. We are paying for new renewable capacity whilst having to keep the old generation capacity operational to cope with events like Storm Dara. So the result is that our energy costs are amongst the highest in the world. What an absolute mess. Another example of the insanity of UK energy policy is carbon capture and storage. The government has pledged an astonishing £22 billion to fund projects that deliver carbon capture. Originally, they had planned for 8 projects, but that since has been cut down to just 3. And guess who benefits from these 3 projects and the 22 billion? The fossil fuel industry. Carbon capture and storage allows the oil and gas companies to continue their operations, continue pulling up oil and gas, all whilst claiming to be carbon free. And the reality is, carbon capture and storage is just a new revenue stream for the existing fossil fuel industry. Imagine getting paid to pump the fuel out of the ground and then getting paid again to put the carbon back in. It is totally insane. And there is countless examples of this greenwashing insanity, which is only transferring money from normal citizens to wealthy multi-billion pound global businesses. Another great example, which you can go and look up on your own time, is blue hydrogen. Hydrogen is sold as the green alternative to natural gas, but guess what blue hydrogen is made from? Natural gas. Like, you couldn't make it up. And even when carbon capture and storage works properly, it only captures about 85 to 90% of emissions and costs about 85 to 120 pounds per tonne. Now, to be fair, carbon capture and storage represents a much better investment than feeding methane inhibitors to dairy cows, but that is a very, very low bar. The I cannot speak today. The BP North Sea Carbon Capture and Storage Project aims to capture 4 million tonnes of CO2 per year. And that sounds really impressive until you realise that China emits 33 million tonnes of CO2 per day. And global emissions are rising by 1 million tonnes of CO2 per day. So this entire BP project, which is funded by me and you through our tax and through our energy bills, is going to be wiped out by just 4 days increase in global emissions. Now, I'm not saying CO2 emissions aren't an issue, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't do sensible things to address our emissions. But we have moved way past doing what is sensible as a country into what is fundamentally stupid. And why are we self-sabotaging ourselves and imposing policies which will decrease the living standards of our citizens, all while the rest of the world simply overtakes us. Net zero might be the greatest example of self-sabotage since the Roman Empire split in two in 285 AD. Just like when the Romans decided to split the empire to make it easier to administer, what seems like a good idea at the time can often end up being disastrous. And I am increasingly convinced the obsession with net zero is disastrous. We could talk about energy all day, but let's move on to some happier news. Leaked government documents suggest a plan to cut meat and dairy consumption by 20% by 2030. I'm sorry, there just is no good news. I've tried. It doesn't exist. Okay, there is a little bit of good news coming up, but this is not a good news story. The government has decided they want us eating less steaks and swapping our natural full-fat cow's milk for high-sugar oat milk. Although it's not oat milk, it's oat drink. And just despite the government, I am genuinely having 2 steaks for my lunch today. I bet I put my fingers up the wrong way round for that bit. Not only that, but we found out this week that the government has proposed mandatory use of feed additives like Bovier from 2030. I've said it before, but I'll say it again. Methane inhibitors are so stupid. It is a capped benefit for a forever recurring cost. If you want more details on that, go watch the TikTok video I done. Methane inhibitors have already been mandated in Denmark, where they estimate it will cost £70 per cow per year at the current price. You can all figure out what's going to happen to that price when the government says you have to use it. And even at that current price, if it was mandated today, that would be a bill for my business and money out of my pocket to the tune of £14,000 per year. And that's £14,000 per year as a best case forever more. You know what? I have a better suggestion for government. How about 20% less legislation and less meddling in people's lives? I think that would actually achieve a lot more. Next up, let's chat about quantum mechanics. This week, Google unveiled that they've had a breakthrough with their quantum computing technology. I've spent about an hour going on a deep dive into this news story to bring you an accurate summary. But for you to understand the accurate summary, I have to take a moment and explain quantum theory to you all, which is essentially not possible, but I'll try my best. A traditional computer uses bits, which are a 1 or a 0. Everything a normal computer does uses 1s and 0s. A quantum computer uses a qubit, and a qubit is essentially probability. So the probability that the bit is a 1 or a 0. What this means is it can essentially be an infinite value, and the qubit only becomes known when it is observed. I know that's going to make no sense, but that's essentially the fundamental principle of quantum mechanics. An object or a data point doesn't exist until it's observed. So in quantum computing, the bits have no known state, but what that means is that they are every possible state at once. Oh, why am I trying to explain this? Because qubits can be every state at once, they can run millions of times faster at doing certain tasks. Essentially, imagine trying to solve a problem with a single supercomputer versus a million rubbish quantum computers. And what Google has done is slightly improve the rubbish quantum computer. I can't believe I know this stuff from the top of my head rather than something I've read for this story, which just shows how much useless information is in here. Anyway, back to the explanation. I've now lost my train of thought. What was I just saying? Quantum theory, qubits. Qubits can be any value. Oh yes, the error correcting. So the problem was, as you scaled the number of qubits, you scaled the error rate exponentially, which introduced a hard cap on how many qubits each of your quantum computers could have. And that's been a problem for at least the last decade. But Google has found a way around that. And what this story is really about is that as they have scaled the number of qubits, the accuracy has improved and the number of errors actually reduced. So is this a breakthrough? Yes. Is it going to have any effect on any of our lives anytime soon? Probably not. Our next news story is about our farming colleagues across the Atlantic. In October 2024, farmer sentiment in the US was at its lowest point since 2016. Essentially, American farmers felt as gloomy about the future of their industry as UK and Irish farmers do today. However, just 1 month later, the sentiment surged, up from 10% positive to 55% positive. And what caused this dramatic change in sentiment and optimism for the future of US agriculture? Well, it wasn't the prices they were being paid, it was the government who was in charge. The organisation that carried out this survey said that the increase in sentiment was due to an improvement in farmer sentiment around the expectation on regulation and taxes. Essentially, farmers are optimistic because their government finally has someone with a brain in charge. And I know on Farm Theory News we talk a lot about politics, but the reality is that farming is now extremely political. And more so than global markets and prices and costs, what's really impacting farmers on the ground is now government policy and government decisions. And this survey really reflects that reality. So we've just got 4.5 more years. Hopefully. Anyway, let's wrap this up with a market update. And this is genuinely good news, which kind of makes everything else we've talked about bearable. Milk prices are really good at the minute, but this is having the desired effect on milk volumes, which are significantly up. And before every dairy farmer in the UK gets too excited by being paid well this winter, just remember that high prices lead to high volumes and high volumes lead to low prices. So don't start planning what new machinery you want to buy in the springtime just yet. And I say that message primarily to myself. In a big win for British pork farmers, British pig farmers. In a big win for British pig farmers, pork exports are back on the menu to China. That's said wrong. Let's try that again. In a big win for British farmers, pork exports to China are back on the menu after a new trade deal worth a whopping £80 million was signed. Switching to inputs, meal prices have remained stable and are potentially falling. Soybean meal and rape meal are down, and maize gluten is particularly cheap at the minute. And our final piece of good news for this week's episode is that fertilizer prices are also down and likely to remain there. With global energy prices having fallen throughout 2024, the cost to manufacture fertilizer has been significantly lower than previous years, which has led to significant supply growth. That has pretty much been matched by demand growth, but the market is currently in balance. And without a change in the meal price to push up profits on arable farms, it's unlikely that demand will significantly increase. Well, that's going to do us for Farm Theory News this week. Hopefully you have now a better idea of how much of your energy bill is going towards net zero and renewables, and have some sort of understanding of the larger scale impacts on society with expensive energy. I know I promised you a solution at the start of this video and I have yet to deliver it, so here it is. All of us need to better understand that living standards and the price of energy are inextricably linked. If you have cheap energy, people feel like they're better off, and if you have expensive energy, people feel worse off. It really shouldn't be possible for a government to get elected on an expensive energy policy, and I think if people better understood the actual cost of things like net zero, that wouldn't happen. Anyway, that's going to do it for this week. Please do give this video a like if you've enjoyed it. Consider subscribing if you haven't already. Apparently it helps a lot. And any comments, stick them down below. I'll see you in the next video.